In this short video, I attempt to demonstrate some of the week 4 concepts. So the first of these concepts is the model view control structure, and this same illustration is part of the activities for this week. So the thing that I'd like you to remember about this is exactly what you see in the diagram. The presentation tier, which are the views, these are the web pages that always get rendered into the browser. The logic tier, or the red center tier, are always the controllers. The green tier is the model tier, and this is where we write all of our interactions that occur with the database. So in our applications, we will create different views to accomplish various tasks. But please notice, views only talk to controllers. Views never talk to other views, nor do they ever talk to the models. They only talk to controllers. Controllers always send back the appropriate view in order to give information to the client who has asked for a particular piece of information. If the controller needs information from the database, it will then ask the model to carry out the query to the database. The model is then responsible for sending the resulting information back to the controller, which in turn then bundles it, sends it into a view, and returns it. So if you'll remember those steps, then this will be pretty easy to remember. When we talk about this, here are some of the advantages. The easiest advantage here that you need to be aware of is that it is very, very, very dominant in how we build software. So if you can learn how to use it in this class, then that will translate into all aspects of coding into your future. The other big benefit here is reusability, because we don't replicate our code over and over and over again. There are a few disadvantages. First, it is a little complex. It takes some time to get used to how this works. However, once you do learn that everything that interacts with the database is in a model, everything that has to make decisions is in the controller, anything that gets presented into the browser is a view, then that will help you with overcoming these disadvantages as well. So we're going to go through 5 different control structures here. So the first of these is the simple if, and it basically looks exactly as you see here. If some value is true, some piece of code will get executed. In this example, when you see the word true, that is a conditional. The thing to remember is that if statements in their tests always will evaluate to true or false. Let me show you a practical example of that. So if we go back to VS Code, you'll notice that I have 2 simple if statements here. The first uses a variable with the value of hungry, and this basically says if you are hungry, then find something to eat. This one says if your age is 19, so if your age is greater than or equal to 18, you are a legal adult. All right, so with that, if we go ahead and run this, we see that in fact it tells us that we should go find something to eat and that we are a legal adult. So this is the simplest of these. If these are not true, then it does nothing. So if we change hungry to famished, now let's redo this, and we find out that it does nothing, right? Even though we know that famished is more hungry than simply hungry, the logic of this if statement does not recognize that, and as a result, it does nothing. On the other hand, our second one does continue to tell us that we are a legal adult. Its extension is simply if else. Now, this is how things usually work. We even saw that in the first one. The only difference is that else is assumed. In this case, it is explicit. If something is true, we'll do one thing. Otherwise, we'll do something else. And just as is with the if, it always evaluates to a Boolean, meaning true or false. Let's look at these if-else statements. So you'll notice that we are starting the same exact way. We have a variable, its value is hungry, and I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit clearer by simply adding a comparison operator to the word hungry. And if we are hungry, then we'll find something healthy to eat because, of course, we are health conscious. Otherwise, we're not health conscious and we'll just go ahead and eat junk food. On the other hand, if our age is 19 and if our age is greater than or 18, we are a legal adult. Otherwise, we are a minor. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and change this 19 to a 16. Now I'll save those. Okay, let's come back over to our browser window. We'll reload, and we see that we are in fact hungry. Therefore, we're going to go find something healthy to eat. But our age is 16, therefore it tells us that we are a minor. So there is an if-else. In this case, both outcomes are expressed. This is the if-else-if-else structure. As with the previous two, it always evaluates to a Boolean. The difference here is that the else-if allows us to do another test. It can be different than the primary test. But in this case, again, we test the first thing. If it's true, we do something. We test a second thing. If it's true, we do that. If neither of the above are true, then we do something else entirely. There is no limit to the number of else-if tests that can be added to a PHP code block. Let's take a look at these examples. You'll notice that in the first one, I have set my variable to null, meaning it has no value whatsoever. So if the variable has any value at all, we'll find something healthy to eat. If, on the other hand, the variable has the value of junk, then we'll eat junk food. But if it has neither of those values, then we will see, don't eat, you're not hungry. In our second example, you'll notice that the value of age has been set to 65. Our first test asks, is your age greater than or equal to 18? And is your age less than 60? If both of those are true, then we declare that you are a legal adult. However, if your age is greater than or equal to 61, we're going to declare that you are a senior citizen. And if none of those are true, then you remain a minor. Let's go ahead and run this. Because our variable has no value, we receive the else statement saying, you're not hungry, so don't eat anything. It also checks here and it says, oh, you do match the criteria of the else if, therefore we declare that you are in fact a senior citizen. Our final statement is going to be our switch statement. You'll notice that the difference is that it allows us to evaluate only a single variable. However, we can evaluate the value of that variable according to different values. So in this case, we have entered a variable here. We then check to see if it's one value. If it is, then we will do something. On the other hand, we can then check for a different value, do something else, and so on and so on. If none of those are true, then we also have a default where we will do something else. Now, if you look at this closely, you will see that it is very much like the if, else, if, else. However, the difference is with the else if, we can always test something different. In this case, we cannot. We're always testing the single variable. We're just testing it for various values. If we come over here, we see that we have a variable. Its value is junk. We are testing that single variable, and we're asking, does it have a value of healthy? If it is, we'll find something healthy to eat. The break is very important because that would end this and also end the switch, which would cause us to move out of the structure. If this is not true, it then moves to the next one. So in this case, it says, is the value of variable junk? If it is, we'll find some junk food to eat. If neither of those is true, then we default to our default statement. This would be the equivalent of an else statement. And it again comes down and it says, well, don't eat anything. You are not hungry. And you can see the result. Because the value was junk, it finds that case junk is the appropriate one, and we see find junk food to eat. On the other hand, if we come up here and change this to healthy and save and reload, you'll see that a different value, because case is now true, and we get a different result. There are advantages and disadvantages to all of these. You will find that in our control structures, in our controllers, we tend to use switch statements because we anticipate we will only be receiving a single variable and it will have varying values of which we can then test. The nice thing about switch statements is that they are typically easy to read. The thing that you have to remember is that in order to have different results, each case must be unique. And that's a mistake that sometimes we make. We duplicate the values of cases. We cannot do that. They must be absolutely unique. PHP variables. The first character of a variable is always the $sign. It must then be followed by a letter or an underscore. If it is followed by any other character or number, it is not understood. Variable names are case sensitive and you cannot use reserved words. There are different types of variables. So we have integer variables, we have string variables, we have Boolean variables, we have double variables, we have arrays. PHP is a loosely typed language, which means when we store a variable with a value, it assumes it to be a string. However, it will, in the interpretation of those, test it against various types of variable types and adjust accordingly. Unlike Java, where we have to declare in advance what kind of data it will hold, that is not true with PHP. In our example here, you'll notice that I have created an array variable. I have made it an array, and we know that is the case because of the square brackets. And in this, I have put various types of data. So as you can see here, I have a string. Here I have an integer. Here I have pi to like the 15th value. That would mean it is a double. We have a true. This is a Boolean. And then we have a subarray. And you'll notice that it just has three values, 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to create an unordered list, and I'm going to then loop through each of the items in this array, and as they are printed to the screen, I am going to have PHP tell us what the type is of each one of these values in our unordered list. Okay. And we can see, in fact, that Goofy is a string, 42 is an integer, 3.14, etc., etc., etc. is a double. True is a Boolean, and the array type of 1, 2, 3 is in fact an array. Those are the various types of values that variables can possess. Let's take just a second and talk about form best practices. In the week 4 preparation readings is this link, and that will bring us to this reading. Now, there are 58 various best practices here. I do not expect you to remember all 58, but there are a few here that I do want you to pay attention to. The first one is this one. Only ask for the information that you absolutely need. If you don't need it, don't ask for it. The second one, rather than putting labels to the left and inputs to the right, you'll notice that causes way too much eye movement and therefore can be confusing to the user. Instead, best practice is to place the label above and the input below, and that way the eye can simply move straight down and it is far less confusing. That is the second one. Only ask for what you need, set up the forms with labels on top, inputs below. Placeholders are pieces of text that we can put inside an input, but not have it remain once the user begins to type their values. This is a great tool for showing them the format of the data that we expect to receive. It should not be used for labeling because it is not accessible. It does not meet our accessibility standards. Always display the field label, as you can see here. This would be the label, this would be the input, and as you can see, we have some placeholders inside indicating what we want. And then there are many, many others. Those are just some of the highlighted ones that I wanted you to pay attention to. If you are curious as to the proper syntax for building a form, then obviously you can click and follow this URL, and that will bring you here. And you can see that it in turn is exemplifying some of those practices we just talked about. You can click the try it yourself and you can see how it is set up. And this would be a template that, of course, you could follow as you build your own forms this week. And then the last thing that I wanted to point out here, and this goes with forms, is paths. When we are building paths in our HTML and in our CSS, we can use all of the basic path types. My suggestion is to use a root-based path, and that is what is exemplified there by the /. So that / says, start at the root of the website, which in our case is htdocs. We would then say PHP Motors, and then we would have a /. We could then direct it specifically to a folder, and then to a file or a subfolder. The thing to remember is that you can only use this with HTML or CSS or JavaScript. If it's browser-based, we're good. If it's PHP, we cannot. We must use a full server path in order to reach it, or use a relative path using our dots to move up or down through the file structure. When we are building a form, we have two basic ways of sending information. We can use a GET or we can use a POST. As you can see, a URL is by default a GET. Whenever we use a POST, everything is sent behind the scenes. It is not easily visible because it's not in the URL, and it has no restrictions on the amount. It is still not secure. It is still plain text, but behind the scenes. Most forms use POST because of that lack of limitation. Here is a chart that gives you a quick overview comparing what the GET and the POST look like side by side. And then finally, when we send data through the web, typically we do this in the form of a key value pair or a name value pair. And if you think about it in real life, we do the same thing. If you meet someone, you say, hello, what is your name? And what you are actually asking is, hello, what is your first name? And they would then reply, I am whatever. And what they're actually saying is, my first name is Susan. And so it's a key value pair. First name equals Susan. First name equals Dan. When we are passing a key value pair through a URL, you'll notice we precede it with a question mark. We then have the key or the name, an equal sign, and then whatever the value is. When we receive these in a controller, remember values from the views always go to the controllers. We use a filter input. Typically, when we do this, you'll find that we use only two basic options. Later on, we will introduce a third and possibly a fourth, but for right now, just two. The first is, where is the data coming from? And these are the options. Again, for right now, we will typically use GET or POST, depending upon how the data is being sent. And as you go through the activities, this gets more explanation. And then the second type is, what is the key or the name so that we can collect its value. You'll see examples of this as we move through. Now you'll notice that down here there are a third and fourth, but we will get into that later in week 7. And I hope that using these pieces of information will help you to be successful this week.